They say every small town has a place you're not supposed to go. For some, it's an abandoned house at the edge of a neighborhood. For others, it's a dark stretch of forest, where kids dare each other to walk through at night. But in this particular town in Pennsylvania, the place everybody whispers about is a tunnel. By day, it looks harmless enough, just a long stretch of old concrete built under the train tracks, its walls dripping with water, covered in graffiti, and filled with the echo of passing cars above. But at night, the tunnel feels different. The air gets colder inside, heavier, and if you stand at one end, you can barely see the other. People say the darkness there isn't normal darkness. It's thicker, like something alive is pressing against your chest, watching you from the shadows. Back in the 1980s, people used to cut through the tunnel all the time. It was a shortcut between downtown and a quiet road leading to the suburbs. Teenagers biked through it, kids spray-painted their names on the walls, and workers heading home would shave off 10 minutes by walking under the bridge instead of around it. But then people started disappearing. It wasn't all at once, not like a sudden wave of kidnappings. It started small, the kind of thing you don't even notice at first. A college student didn't show up for class. A man never made it back from his night shift. A young woman's car was found parked by the side of the road with the keys still in the ignition, but she was gone. At first, the police thought it was coincidence. Runaways, domestic problems. Maybe someone just moved away without telling anyone. But the town was small and people talked, and soon everyone realized the missing people all had one thing in common. They were last seen heading toward the tunnel, and then, a few months later, the bodies started showing up. The first was a teenager named Melissa, who had been missing for 4 days. Her body was found in a shallow stream not far from the exit of the tunnel. She wasn't drowned. She hadn't fallen. Her throat had been cut clean and her shoes were gone. No blood trail, no sign of a struggle, just dumped like trash. Weeks later, another body turned up in almost the same spot. This time it was a man in his 30s. Same detail. His throat was cut. His shoes were missing. That's when the press picked it up. And soon everyone was calling the place cursed. Haunted or worse, home to a serial killer. Police did what they could. They set up patrols near the tunnel, questioned locals, searched the woods around it. But nothing made sense. There were no signs of forced entry on the victims' cars. No evidence left behind in the tunnel. No witnesses who saw anything suspicious. And yet every few months another person went missing. A jogger, a high school kid, a nurse walking home after her shift. Sometimes their bodies were found days later, sometimes never at all. The one thing everyone noticed was always the same: the shoes. Every victim who turned up was barefoot. That detail spread like wildfire around town. People whispered about it in diners and gas stations, theories piling up. Some said the killer took the shoes as trophies. Others believed the victims had been forced to run barefoot in the dark, bleeding, terrified, stumbling toward the light at the end of the tunnel, but never making it. And then there were those who swore it wasn't a person at all, but something older, something that lived in the tunnel, taking shoes so no one could ever walk back out again. By the late 80s, people avoided the place entirely. Parents warned their kids to stay away. Drivers took the long route around. And the tunnel earned a name, the Hollow Mile. Some locals even claimed you could hear things if you stood near it at night. Faint footsteps when no one was inside. A whisper carried through the concrete. Once in a while, the sharp metallic scrape of something dragging along the wall, even when the tunnel was empty. A few unlucky souls swore they saw figures inside, tall, thin shadows that didn't move right, watching from a distance, never coming closer, but never letting you look away either. Despite the fear, not everyone listened. Teenagers dared each other to ride their bikes through it, laughing nervously as they pedaled fast, their voices echoing against the wet walls. But sometimes those dares didn't end with laughter. One kid, barely 16, told his friends he heard someone running behind him when he was halfway through, the slap of bare feet on the concrete chasing him, getting closer. He swore he pedaled as hard as he could, heart pounding, and when he burst out into the open air on the other side, the sound stopped. He looked back, expecting to see one of his friends, but the tunnel was empty, just darkness. He never went near it again. The police reports kept stacking up. Victims always linked to that stretch of road, the same injuries, The same eerie detail with the missing shoes. Some officers started believing it wasn't random. It was organized. Someone was hunting. Yet even with patrols, even with undercover cars parked nearby, no one ever caught a glimpse of the killer, not once. It was as if the tunnel swallowed people whole, letting only their broken bodies slip back out. The town grew more paranoid as the years went by. By the mid-90s, parents didn't just warn their kids, they forbade them from going near it. Stories circulated about a man in a dark coat, who was seen lurking by the entrance at odd hours, never talking, never moving until someone got close, and then vanishing into the dark. People said if you looked too long into the tunnel at night, you'd see him standing just out of reach of the light, waiting. And if you kept staring, he would take a step closer. The Hollow Mile became legend, a place teenagers whispered about at sleepovers, a place that showed up in hushed conversations at the bar, a place where even adults admitted they felt something unnatural. The killer was never caught. The victims kept coming. And yet the world outside the town never really paid attention. To outsiders, it was just another unsolved case, another urban legend exaggerated by locals. But to the people who lived there, who saw their neighbors vanish, who buried their own friends and family without answers, it was all too real. And the scariest part is that the tunnel is still there, silent, empty, waiting. For years the killings continued, and then, almost as suddenly as they started, they stopped. No one could explain why. The last confirmed victim, linked to the tunnel, was in the early 90s, and after that, silence. The town tried to move forward. Families who had lost loved ones had no choice but to carry on, though the pain never really left. Some people convinced themselves the killer had died, or been locked away for some other crime, or simply moved on to another place. Others believed something in the tunnel had been satisfied, like it had claimed enough lives and gone back into whatever darkness it had come from. Whatever the reason, by the late 90s the tunnel was quiet, abandoned, avoided. Grass grew tall around its edges, graffiti faded under layers of grime, and the air inside felt thicker than ever. The police shut down any investigations and filed the unsolved murders away. Though no one truly forgot, the Hollow Mile remained a scar on the town, a place everyone recognized but no one wanted to talk about. Then years later the silence shattered. In 2002, long after most people had stopped thinking about the tunnel, a man named Eric came stumbling out of it at 3 in the morning. Half naked, bleeding and screaming for help. He collapsed on the road, clutching his arms where deep cuts ran across his skin. A driver passing by saw him and rushed him to the hospital. What he told the police after that night shook the entire community and dragged the tunnel's nightmare back into the present. Eric said he had been walking home after leaving a friend's house. He admitted he had been drinking, but he wasn't drunk enough to imagine what he saw. He took the shortcut through the tunnel, not thinking much of it. By then, most people avoided it, but not everyone believed the stories anymore. He said it was around 2:30 when he entered. The first thing he noticed was how quiet it was. No wind, no sound of cars above, just an unnatural silence. He made it halfway through when he heard footsteps behind him. At first he thought maybe someone else had gone in, so he turned around. That's when he saw a tall figure standing in the dark. Eric couldn't make out the face, only that the person was wearing a long dark coat and the outline of something in his hand. The figure didn't run at him, didn't speak at first, just stood there. Then, in a voice that Eric described as raspy, low like air being forced through broken glass, it whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Before Eric could move, the figure lunged. He felt a blade slice across his arm, and then another across his side. He stumbled backward, panicked, and ran as fast as he could toward the exit. But the sound of footsteps followed him. Not just one pair, multiple. He swore he could hear bare feet slapping against the concrete, surrounding him, coming from behind, even from the walls. As he ran, something strange happened. He said he glanced back for a split second and saw more figures behind the tall man. Dozens of them. Standing still, pale, their eyes empty, their mouths slightly open as if mid-breath. They weren't moving, just watching. And then, as he blinked, they were gone. Just darkness again. He kept running, his heart nearly exploding in his chest. And that's when he dropped his wallet. Instinct made him turn back. The second he did, headlights from a car passing, Overhead spilled light into the tunnel through cracks in the concrete. The figure froze, caught in the light for a moment like a shadow solidified, and then it vanished, just gone. Eric didn't stop. He grabbed his wallet and sprinted until he burst out into the open air, where he collapsed on the road. The driver who found him said he was shaking, so violently he couldn't even speak at first, his eyes wide like he had seen something worse than death. When police interviewed him later, they found his cuts were real, deep, clean slices made by a sharp blade. But what unsettled them most was that his shoes were missing. Eric swore he had been wearing them when he entered the tunnel. He didn't remember losing them, didn't feel them being pulled off. They were simply gone, just like the victims years before. The police tried to treat it like another assault, maybe a mugging gone wrong. But Eric's story didn't fit. There were no other footprints in the tunnel besides his own. No fingerprints, no signs of a struggle except for his blood. Yet his wounds were undeniable and his terror was genuine. People whispered that Eric had gotten too close to the truth, that the tunnel killer had never left, just gone quiet, waiting for someone foolish enough to wander in. Others swore that Eric hadn't been attacked by a person at all, but by the shadows of the victims themselves, dragged back into the tunnel to relive what had happened to them. Word spread fast. The Hollow Mile was back in the news. Families who had buried loved ones years earlier were forced to relive their grief. Younger people, who had only heard the stories growing up, now believed them. For weeks, no one dared even drive near the tunnel. The police put up barricades and announced they were investigating again, but deep down, no one expected them to find anything. They never had before. Eric's account spread online too, picked up by message boards and local forums. Some people mocked him, saying he was drunk, hallucinating, making up a story. But others pointed out the details, the missing shoes, the cuts, the way his story matched the old killings, almost exactly, too much matched for it to be coincidence. And there was one more detail that Eric revealed later, something he hadn't told the police right away. He said that when he ran, just before the headlights froze the figure, he heard voices whispering in unison behind him. Dozens of voices, men and women, young and old, all whispering the same thing, stay. He said the sound didn't just echo in his ears, it vibrated inside his skull, crawling down his spine, freezing him in place for a split second. He had to force himself to keep moving, to not stop. If he had stopped, he was sure he would never have left. Whether people believed him or not, one thing was certain. Eric survived something inside that tunnel that night. Something sharp, cut into his skin. Something took his shoes, and something wanted him to stay. After Eric's escape, the tunnel was no longer just an old local legend. It was a living nightmare again, reopened in everyone's minds. The police put locks on both ends, heavy iron gates with chains as thick as a wrist. They claimed it was for safety, to keep kids from vandalizing the walls or homeless people from camping inside. But everyone in town knew the truth. They weren't trying to protect people from the tunnel. They were trying to protect the town from what lived in it. For a while, the gates gave people a false sense of security. The Hollow Mile was sealed, locked away, left to rot. No one had to drive through it or walk near it. But gates can be broken, locks can be cut, and curiosity has always been stronger than fear. Every few years, someone decided to test their luck. Sometimes it was bored teenagers chasing the thrill of a dare. Sometimes it was outsiders who had read about the story online and wanted to prove it was all just a myth. And almost every time, those people were never seen again. In 2015, everything boiled over when a retired detective who had worked on the original cases back in the 80s anonymously leaked pages of the old police files. The notes were disturbing in ways that the public had never known before. For example, the police had documented shoe prints at nearly every crime scene, not just one or two, but dozens. They lined the tunnel, crisscrossing each other, circling around. But none of them matched the victims. None of them matched each other either. Different sizes, different shapes, yet every single one belonged to no one in the database. It was as if dozens of strangers had been there, barefoot, walking in endless circles. The detail about the missing shoes was already terrifying, but now the idea of footprints that couldn't be explained gave it a whole new layer. If there was only one killer, how could there be so many prints? The files also described sounds that officers themselves had heard during late-night patrols. Men and women who swore they heard whispers in the dark, faint at first but then rising. surrounding them until they panicked and left. Some officers claimed they heard children laughing, echoing in the distance, even when no children were anywhere nearby. One officer resigned the week after patrolling near the tunnel, writing in his letter that he felt watched the entire time, like unseen eyes followed his every step. Another admitted privately that he had seen something inside what looked like a woman standing near the center of the tunnel. He said her skin was pale, her dress torn, her hair covering her face. He shouted at her to come out, but she didn't move. When he stepped forward, she simply disappeared into thin air. The release of these files reignited the fear, but it also drew more attention from outsiders, paranormal investigators, amateur ghost hunters. Even journalists from out of state started showing up. The town tried to keep people away, but curiosity spread faster than warnings. One group of investigators managed to sneak in at night with cameras. They live-streamed the whole thing for an online audience. The video was shaky, filled with nervous laughter at first, but halfway through the feed cut to static. When it returned for just a moment, viewers swore they could see shapes moving in the background. Not reflections, not tricks of light, but actual human forms drifting just out of reach of the flashlight beams. Moments later, the screen went black and the live stream ended. None of those investigators were ever seen again. Their car was found parked near the tunnel. Doors locked, equipment still inside, but no trace of the people themselves. After that, the town council demanded the tunnel be demolished, filled in with concrete buried for good, but the plan was never carried out. Construction workers who came to survey the area refused to go inside. They claimed the air burned their lungs, their equipment malfunctioned, and one man fainted after hearing a voice whisper his name in his ear, even though no one was close to him. Funding was pulled, the project abandoned, and the tunnel was left standing. To this day, it's still there. Rusted gates chained shut, warning signs bolted into the concrete, but the fear has only grown. The strangest part of all is that even with everything known now, the deaths still happen. Every few years, like clockwork, a new missing person poster goes up. Sometimes it's a teenager, sometimes it's a traveler passing through, sometimes it's someone who just vanished without explanation. And if their car is found near the tunnel, the town already knows how the story will end. People argue about what the truth really is. Some are convinced it was always a human killer, someone clever enough to never get caught, someone who still lurks in the shadows, waiting for his next victim. Others are sure it's something else entirely, something older than the town, older than the tracks above, something that demands blood to keep existing. They point to the footprints, to the whispers, to the pale figures that vanish when you look straight at them. They say the tunnel doesn't just take lives, it keeps them. And maybe the most terrifying thought of all is that it isn't done. The tunnel is still hungry. Every time the locks are cut, every time someone dares to step inside, thinking they'll be the one to prove the story's false, the cycle begins again. The town has learned not to speak about it openly, not to tempt fate by saying too much, but the legend has spread online. And there are always people who think they're braver than the rest, people who believe horror stories are just stories, until they're the ones who go missing. So if you're driving late at night through Pennsylvania and you see a tunnel that seems too quiet, too long and too dark, you should remember this story, because the Hollow Mile has already taken dozens of lives, and it will take more. It doesn't matter if you believe in ghosts or serial killers or cursed places. What matters is that people who enter it often don't come out. And if you hear the sound of footsteps behind you while you're inside, if you feel the air grow heavier, if you hear whispers telling you to stay, then it's already too late. The tunnel doesn't let go.